Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to learn to solve quadratic inequalities. We've got three success criteria, and the first one is to solve quadratic equations. So to be able to solve quadratic inequalities, we need to be confident in being able to factorize and solve quadratics. A quadratic is an expression that has the highest power of squared. So it could be x squared or y squared or something squared. So if we want to solve this quadratic, we first factorize it into two brackets. So we need to think what times is together to make minus 20, but adds together to make minus 8. So if we list all the numbers that times together to make minus 20, so 1 and minus 20, minus 1 and 20, 2 and minus 10, minus 2 and 10, 4 and minus 5, and minus 4 and 5, and think which of these would add together to give us minus 8. And that's going to be 2 and minus 10. They add together to make minus 8, and they times together to make minus 20. So those are the numbers that go inside the bracket: x plus 2 and x minus 10. Now, because those two brackets, when they multiply together, they make 0, we can make each of the brackets equal 0. So either x plus 2 equals 0 or x minus 10 equals 0. And now we just need to solve to find x. So for the first one, if we subtract 2 from both sides, then we get x equals minus 2. For the second bracket, if we add 10 to both sides, we get x equals 10. So our answer is x equals minus 2 or x equals 10. In this question, we've got a coefficient of x squared, so we need to do something a bit different. So again, we're going to start by factorising the quadratic. So here, the first thing we do is multiply together the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, and the constant, which is minus 5. So they times together to make minus 15. So we need a pair of numbers that will times together to make minus 15. So 1 and minus 15, minus 1 and 15, 3 and minus 5, and minus 3 and 5. And think which of these pairs will add together to make positive 2. So that's going to be minus 3 and 5. They add together to make positive 2, and they times together to make minus 15. So we need to split up the 2x into minus 3x and 5x. And then we can split the equation, or the expression, into two parts. Factorise the first part with 3x on the outside of the bracket. So that means inside the bracket, we're going to have x minus 1. And then we do the same to the second half of the equation. So we're going to factorise it with 5 on the outside. And again, inside the bracket, we should have x minus 1. So we should end up with the same bracket in each half of the equation. So that means our first bracket is 3x plus 5. And our second bracket is x minus 1. So now we've factorised the expression into two brackets. So now we can solve the equation. So again, make each bracket equal to 0. First bracket, if we subtract 5 from both sides, well, 3x equals minus 5, and then divide by both sides by 3, so x equals minus 5 over 3. For the second bracket, we just need to add 1 to both sides, so x equals 1. So our answer is x equals minus 5 over 3, or x equals 1. Here's some questions for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to mark your work, press play. Here are your answers. So there's your green answers, and there's your amber answers. And now we've completed success criteria 1. So now we're going to move on to number 2, and this is to sketch quadratic graphs. So a quadratic graph is a symmetrical U-shaped curve called a parabola. Now if it's got a positive x squared, then it's a U-shape. And if it's a negative x squared, then it's an upside down U-shape. So to be confident sketching a quadratic, we need to make sure we're able to sketch quadratic graphs. So if we want to sketch this quadratic graph, first of all, decide whether it's a positive or a negative graph. So we look at the x squared, and the x squared is positive. Then we solve the equation. So when it equals 0, we can solve it, factorize it into 2 brackets, and that means that x equals minus 3 or x equals minus 2. So these solutions are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So because it's a positive, that means it's going to be a U-shape, and it's going to cross the x-axis at minus 3 and minus 2. So it's going to look something like that. Again, in this question, first of all, we need to decide whether it's a positive or negative quadratic, and it's a positive x squared, so this is a positive graph. Then we can solve it, make it equal 0 and solve it, and this will tell us where it crosses the x-axis. So factorize it into 2 brackets, and then solve it. So x equals 5, or x equals minus 2. That means it's going to be a U-shaped curve that crosses the x-axis at 5 and minus 2. So it's going to look like this. Again, for this one, we need to decide whether it's going to be positive or negative. And this has got a negative x squared, so this is going to be a negative. Then we can solve the equation. So if we factorize it with the minus sign on the outside of the bracket first, and then factorize it into 2 brackets, so that means x equals minus 3 or x equals minus 1. So we can now sketch this graph because we know it's going to be an upside down U shape, and it's going to cross the x-axis at minus 3 and minus 1. So it's going to look like this. Here are some questions for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to see what you should have done, press play. Here are your answers. So there's your green answers. There's your amber answers. And there's your red answers. So now we've completed success criteria 2. So now we're going to move on to number 3, and this is to solve quadratic inequalities. So here we want to solve this quadratic inequality. And if we start by factorising it into two brackets first, and then imagine it equals 0 so that we can then solve it. So if it was to equal 0, x would equal 6 or x would equal 4. So now we do a quick sketch of the graph. So we know it's going to be a U shape that crosses the x-axis at 4 and 6. Now we want to solve this quadratic when it's less than or equal to 0. So that's the bit that's below the x-axis. So when it's less than or equal to 0, we have a look at what part of the curve is below the x-axis. Well, we can see this part of the curve is below the x-axis. So that is the part of the curve that's in between 4 and 6. So we give our answer as 4 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 6. In this question, this time the quadratic is greater than 0. So we still do the same thing. If we factorise it into two brackets, so times together 2 and minus 18, which is minus 36. And then think what two numbers will times together to make minus 36, but add together to make 9. So that's 12 and minus 3. Then split the quadratic into two parts and factorise both parts. That means our two brackets are 2x minus 3 and x plus 6. That means our curve is going to cross the x-axis at 3 over 2 and at minus 6. We can now sketch this quadratic. So it's going to cross the x-axis at minus 6 and at 3 over 2. It's going to look like this. This time we want to solve the quadratic when it's greater than 0. So the greater than means we're looking at the part of the graph that's above the x-axis. So the part of the graph that's above the x-axis are these two parts. So we're going to give our answer in two parts. The first part is less than minus 6. And the second part is greater than 3 over 2. So we'd give our answer like this. For this question, first of all, we need to set it so it's greater than 0. So we subtract 15 from both sides. Then we can factorise it, so times together 3 and minus 15, which is minus 45. And then think what two numbers will times together to make minus 45, but add together to make minus 12. So that's minus 15 and 3. Split it into two parts and factorise both halves. So our two brackets are 3x plus 3 and x minus 5. That means our quadratic is going to cross the x-axis at minus 1 and 5. So we can do a quick sketch. So our quadratic will look like this. And again, we're trying to solve it when it's greater than 0. So we're looking at the parts of the graph that are above the x-axis. So that's above the x-axis means it's less than minus 1 and x is greater than 5. So that is our answer there. Here are some questions for you to have a go at. Pause the video, and when you're ready to mark your work, press play. Here are your answers. So there's your green answers, there's your amber answers, and there's your red answers. So now we've completed success criteria 3. Now that we've completed the last objective, it's time to end the video. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you found it useful. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. See ya.